EcoCast. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Matt Keel, Director of Product Marketing at Sequent Security. Matt, are you there?
I sure am. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being on, Matt. Good to have you. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thanks, everyone. As the slide says, I'm Matt Kyle. I'm with a little security company called Sequent Security, Director of Product Marketing here, and we are going to talk about the topic of preventing fraud caused by account takeovers. So this is account takeovers are a very common challenge in many industries, but particularly in financial services industries, obviously because of the money hidden behind those accounts. So real quickly, a little bit about Sequent Security, venture-backed security company out in Silicon Valley, California, focused on preventing automated attacks that might cause fraud or theft. We are managed by some industry veterans from both Palo Alto Networks and Symantec. Enough said about that. Let's get on to the meat of the matter. So many organizations are moving many of their applications to the web, right? And when I talk about applications, particularly in a financial services environment, those applications might be the ability for me to go in and transfer money in my Wells Fargo account or do retirement planning. Each one of these functions is considered an application, and I can access them using a web browser from my PC, using my mobile app, and if I am a partner, I might be using exposed APIs. For example, in the financial services industry, there's a common funds transfer protocol, OFX, that is API-based and used by many banks to transfer money. It's also very well documented and exposed, and so what you'll find in my presentation in a little bit, it's actually been used as an attack vector. And that's where we get into a little bit more detail. The financial services applications are high-profile targets. As I mentioned before, it's the money that's hidden behind it. The attackers will use a series of techniques, tools, infrastructure, and behaviors to launch these automated attacks against your public-facing applications. And, I'm going to dig into a little bit more about each one of the tools they might use. So stolen credentials. Every week, it seems that we see another data breach. Yesterday, you probably all saw that 250 million records Microsoft had exposed going as far back as 2005. They are the support records, complete with name and email address. Those credentials are used by attackers to then target other applications. The attackers are leveraging the fact that 53% or thereabouts of us reuse passwords. As often as you hear "don't reuse passwords," it's a very common mistake. Tools. So attackers will use off-the-shelf tools such as Sniper or Sentry MBA. These are predefined, commercially available tools. They're community supported that allow an attacker to target a website, for example, Wells Fargo or Bank of America, or even a mid-sized credit union, Alliant or Regions Bank. They'll target them with the credentials, distributing the attack across the infrastructure that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. These are, again, commercially available networks of compromised IP addresses. If you do a search for bulletproof proxy, you'll find a whole list of proxies, services that an attacker can subscribe to. They market themselves they market the fact that they have hundreds of thousands of IP addresses distributed around the world that allow an attacker to anonymize and distribute the attack. And then behavior. The attackers will modify behavior, or they will do things like rotate the browser fingerprint. They'll do things like keyboard smashing techniques to get the prompt for a re-enter your password. They will modify their behavior in order to either hide or respond to being blocked. The ramifications of these attacks, it depends on the type of attack. The most common that we see in the financial services industry is account takeovers. We also see a fake account creation where they'll create a fake account in order to try and take advantage of perhaps sign-up bonuses, that type of thing. And then business logic abuse of the APIs themselves. That's the OFX example. Ultimately, it's either theft and or fraud is the end goal of these types of attacks. Again, I can't stress it enough, is that the challenge you face as a security practitioner or a financial industry managing these applications is the transactions look like they're legitimate. Right? If somebody is trying to log in, you don't want to block that login. And you don't know for sure whether that login is an automated, part of an automated attack, and it's a failed login, or whether it's a real person who's just forgotten their password. And so many times organizations will err on the side of not blocking these transactions for the risk of creating bad user experience. So it's very much a balancing act that folks have to strike. Now, let's go through an example. This is a Fortune 100 financial services customer of ours who had found that they were getting having account takeover attacks and their funds transfer. So the attackers deconstructed the mobile app, found the login API, and then began their automated attack against that API. If they were successful in finding a valid user, and remember, it doesn't have to be a whole lot of valid users. It can be a small handful of valid users to be a successful attack. If they found a valid user, they would then immediately execute a funds transfer from that account takeover that they had taken over across the OFX API into their own fake account, resulting in loss of those funds. So in this scenario, the APIs were targeted directly. So the key here for us as Sequent in being able to protect it was that the machine learning based approach that we took allowed us to see that API based traffic right alongside all of the browser based traffic and detect and then prevent that attack. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. Now, if we take a step down, what we're seeing is a mid-sized, what I would say mid-sized credit unions or mid-sized financial services organizations. These are not the B of A's of the world or the Amexes of the world. These are Regions Bank or Alliant Credit Union, smaller mid-sized credit unions. What we're seeing is an uptick in account takeovers. Not really sure the reasons why. The attackers might view them as lower profile targets, and as such, they might have a smaller security staff, a smaller budget, might not have the same levels of security and protection. Might be political climate. Some of our customers have seen traffic coming from nation states that the United States has not been kind to. Now because of the ability to distribute those attacks across the world, You don't really know if it's actually coming from that country or whether it's being routed through that country, but these are some of the possible reasons why. Now, if we look at what I did is the most common attack, as I mentioned, are account takeovers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 different account takeover attacks in customer examples. So in this particular attack, the unique characteristic that I saw in the data was the massive global distribution of the attack. So the attackers used a combination of infrastructure and tools to distribute 1.4 million requests across 56,000 IP addresses. And those IP addresses were distributed globally from Vietnam, United States, China, and Canada. So it's a very global distribution of the attack, which in some respects is one of the characteristics that we're able to see and begin to look at it more seriously to determine if the attack is malicious or legitimate. The behavior that the attackers exhibited, not very sophisticated, so there were no user agent or browser rotation efforts. The logins were at what would appear to be odd times for the particular geographic location. And the credentials that were used were primarily email-based. The username was primarily email-based, which in many financial services industries is no longer allowed. And so it was very easy to determine the malicious nature. When you look at all of these different things, it was very easy for us to determine the malicious nature of the attack. In the second example, in this particular account takeover example, the unique characteristic was that the attackers targeted the Chrome mobile browser. So it's a little bit more sophisticated effort than the first example that we showed. The attackers used very sophisticated programmatic rotation of the user agent. They were generating unique signatures to spoof the Chrome or mimic the Chrome mobile browser. The mistake that they made really is they used an obsolete version of HTTP. So this might be a function of the tool that they used, the source code that they might have grabbed off the hacker community. It might have been a new or inexperienced attacker. Not really sure, why, but this was an immediate red flag. The infrastructure they used were this is very interesting. This is a little bit, more. The infrastructure was a little bit more focused on private private proxies as opposed to the previous slide, which were more bulletproof proxies, public, if you will. OVH and Online SaaS are 2 French providers. DigitalOcean and Amazon were the other infrastructure providers that we saw the IP addresses coming from. The third example, the unique characteristic was the browser fingerprint rotation that they used, and the fact that it was heavily U.S.-based. Now, both of these financial services organizations that I'm talking about here are U.S.-based, so this one would make a little bit more sense. The tools that they used, the behavior that they exhibited, they focused on Firefox version 66 and 2 versions of Chrome. They are fairly recent. I think 66 is about a year old. 71 and 74 are a little bit more recent. And then they rotated fingerprints across 120,000 different browser fingerprints. So that was the behavior that they used and the tools that they executed to perform this attack. The infrastructure was primarily distributed across United States residential IP addresses. So this would be defined as more of a bulletproof proxy environment. The proxies that I spoke about earlier, where they market themselves with thousands of IP addresses, those are where you'll find the residential IP addresses. These are, the garage door openers, your refrigerator, compromised Alexa or smart devices, compromised home routers. You get the idea. So these are very high-quality IP addresses for an attacker. When you think about a financial services organization, you think about online banking. If I'm logging in from my house, I'm going through my Comcast router. So if you are the security team on the financial services side and you see that traffic coming in from a residential IP address as opposed to some other commercial IP address or other location, you're going to be err on the side of not blocking it. And so, again, this makes that challenge of determining legitimate versus malicious that much more difficult. So, how do we go about determining malicious from legitimate and helping you defend your public-facing applications? We take an AI-driven, artificial intelligence-driven approach. CQAI is the product, the heart of our product. It has been trained for the last 5 years in customer environments, so we have roughly 200 machine learning models that look at all of your web, mobile, and API-based traffic, looking at it from the characteristics that I mentioned previously, and I'll get into in just a moment. And then we basically will go through three steps really. We'll first discover all of the public-facing applications, building an intuitive sitemap, if you will, of all of the public-facing applications that are exposed on the Internet. We'll then analyze that traffic, looking at the intent of each request. So this is where the machine learning algorithms really come into play. So we're going to be looking at the behaviors. We're going to be looking at where it's coming from. We're going to be looking at the tools in use, the infrastructure in use, and it will come up with a confidence score that will tell you whether that traffic is legitimate or malicious. And then you can take a number of steps. You can rate limit, you can geofence, you can block it, you can log it and just monitor, and you can send a deceptive response back to the attacker. So you can send a custom response back to the attacker that might indicate that they are being successful when really they're not. What that does is that allows you to put some guardrails around the attacker. If you outright block the attacker, for example, they will retool and try another vector. Sending a deceptive response back gives them the sense of being successful, and that it keeps them in their place, if you will. And then finally, you can also send the findings to another piece of your security infrastructure. So you can send it to a log analysis tool, a forensics tool. You can send it to the fraud department for additional validation and testing. Send it to another firewall or a WAF for enforcement there. So it's a REST-based API that allows you to integrate more tightly with your existing security infrastructure or IT infrastructure. So I kind of already touched on this, so I probably won't go through it in too much detail, but the AI engine does look at all four of the elements that I have talked about throughout the presentation, looking at the credentials, the tools in use, the infrastructure, and how the attackers behave. This is really the heart of how we go about determining malicious from legitimate. And you know, the key thing that we bring to the table that others do not is it's an AI-driven approach that can be deployed out of band. So there is no impact on your traffic flow, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. More importantly, it eliminates a lot of the penalties that JavaScript injection and mobile SDK integration methodologies require. That's the primary, those two elements are the primary mechanisms by which the first generation bot protection mechanisms would work. So you'd inject JavaScript into every single one of the web pages or applications that you want to protect, or you integrate the SDK into the mobile app. Now the challenges there are that the page load speed is impacted, your development cycles are impacted, and there's always the risk of missing one of the applications that is then deployed by that rogue department. And then it also impacts the user experience in that you might need to force the users to upgrade their mobile application. So some challenges. The AI-based approach that does not require instrumentation or integration does effectively bake security into your application workflow. I already talked a little bit about the machine learning rules that are customizable that will separate malicious from legitimate intent. And then it's a continual learning process. Each environment, as you might imagine, is going to be different. Retail is going to be different than financial services. Retail will see fake accounts, some account takeovers, and lots of content scraping. Financial services, it's primarily account takeovers. Very flexible deployment, so it's software-based. So it's actually a container, a Docker container that is deploys out into several different modules depending on whether you want to deploy it in your data center, in your public cloud, or a hybrid environment. And we've just released a SaaS offering where we manage the infrastructure, you manage the policies and the data, so it helps reduce the operational burden required to prevent these types of attacks. I already mentioned how it can integrate, export information out. It can also import information in. So, for example, if you have a fraud department as a financial services, you have a fraud department that keeps track of all the failed users or fraudulent users. You can pull that data, that user database, into the product so that it can be used to compare against what we see coming across the actual login application of the website. Can import third-party threat feeds and that type of thing. As the diagram, fairly simplified diagram, it shows, we take a copy of the traffic off of your load balancer or your switch, analyzing it using the AI engine and the management, CQ Insight management. The findings are then sent to a small lightweight component that sits in line. That's where you see the bot defense and app firewall there in line. And we can respond, as I mentioned, using block, rate limit, geofence, and deception. Or you can send the findings to your security infrastructure. We've been around for a couple of years and have quite a few large Fortune 100 customers. I already talked a little bit about the financial services customer. They have 20 different applications, and before we came into that environment, roughly as high as 90% of the traffic to their logins were automated bots. So we're able to not only prevent the account takeovers that I talked about earlier, but are also able to reduce the amount of traffic hitting their infrastructure, which is often a side benefit. A large retailer whose loyalty points was very lucrative and could be turned directly into cash. We helped this retailer stop that loyalty point fraud, protecting roughly 16 public-facing applications on their website successfully. And then a social network. This one is a interesting one in that the account takeovers were then used. The successful accounts that were taken over were then used to commit romance scam. So the relationships were established. Over time, the request for money came in, and the unsuspecting person on the other end who thought that they were in a relationship was scammed out of money. On average, the romance scams that had been successful previous to Sequent, it was roughly $12,000 per incident. So we were able to eliminate those romance scams from that environment. Different examples, all very much focused on preventing automated attacks using the AI-based approach. As I mentioned, we just rolled out a SaaS offering. You can try it for free now, a free 30-day trial. You can sign up there right off the website. It'll take if you're interested in doing this, it takes about a day for us to, spin up the environment. Basically what we will do is, if you're using a CDN, we'll redirect the traffic from your CDN to Sequent and then onto the origin. We have documented integrations with Akamai, Cloudflare, and Amazon CloudFront, as well as Fastly. So it's fairly easy to get started if you're interested in taking us up on that offer. With that, we are going to open it up for questions.
Absolutely, yeah, great presentation. While we do some Q&A, I'm just going to bring up this poll question. It says, what additional information would you like about the Sequent solution? So let's see, first question that came in, they're asking, how is Sequent deployed?
Sure. Deployed, I kind of touched on that a little bit. We can go into a little bit more detail, but it depends on the environment. It can be deployed into your private data, into your physical data center, your traditional data center. It can be deployed in the public cloud environment. Most common is AWS, but certainly can be deployed in GCP as well as Azure. And then we have a SaaS offering. So it's software-based. It's delivered as a single Docker container. And then as it's deployed, it breaks out into a series of different modules that are deployed out of band and or in line, depending on the direction that the customer needs to go. If they want to go to monitor-only mode, then there's no inline component deployed. If they want to go into a defense mode, there's a small lightweight component that takes action depending on the findings that are found in the out-of-band analysis.
Okay. So what about if somebody has an existing, security infrastructure? How does Sequent integrate with that?
Sure. REST, it is, from day one, we've had a series of REST-based APIs, so we can take all the findings and send the findings out to an existing firewall, an existing WAF. You can send the findings to your SIM, ArcSight, folks like ArcSight or Splunk. You can send the findings to your fraud department for some additional analysis and verification. So fairly open platform that allows us to tie, make the rest of your security infrastructure a bit stronger in improving your security posture, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds very easy to get started. I'm sure this could help a lot of financial services companies out there. I'm curious, I mean, with so many security solutions available, what do you feel like makes Sequence really unique?
Well, so you're absolutely right. I came from I've been in the security industry for 20 odd years, and there are many different point solutions out there. When you look at the thing that you have to look at is the type of attack here. These look like legitimate transactions, so it's very hard for organizations to separate legitimate from malicious. So we separate ourselves. So there's a select set of vendors that will are taking that challenge on. They're the Shapes of the world, the Distilled Networks of the world, the Akamais of the world. All of them primarily use JavaScript and mobile SDK integration. So they need to integrate into your applications to collect the telemetry, right? So the JavaScript is collecting the telemetry that they're trying to analyze to turn on the public-facing web apps to determine malicious versus legitimate. Same premise for the mobile SDK. Now, I didn't mention APIs there because they really don't do a very good job of catching the APIs, and many of the attackers are going directly to APIs. So our differentiation is that we take the ML AI-based approach and analyze your traffic out of band so we don't inject any delay or latency, and then send those findings to a small lightweight component that takes enforcement. That means we can look at all three types of application endpoints: API-based, mobile-based, and web-based. So that really is very much our differentiation from some of the other folks that are out there.
Okay, yeah, that's an important point there. So really easy to get started, can protect a financial services company from so many different attacks. It's a great presentation, Matt. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thanks very much, folks. Take care.